Good morning. My name is Carla Hernandez, and we're going to be talking about building relationships. Today, we're going to call this a professional development that works because I am an instructional coach, which I've been in this position well over 10 years. And my desire is to teach other instructional coaches how to build relationships, also how to maintain trusting relationships, and in those trusting relationships, how to give solid and valuable feedback. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I would like you to do is I want you to click on this word list here. Everybody should have the PowerPoint on their drive. And I want you to answer, where am I at today? Using 3 to 5 words. So you're going to choose 3 to 5 words from this list that are going to describe how you're feeling today. Once you find those words, we're going to go ahead and have you submit them on the word cloud by clicking on this link. This will be a 3 to 5 minute activity. Please make sure you do it independently so that we can get a good feel for the room. So let's go ahead and start our timer. Thank you to everyone who is participating and feeling willing to be able to share where you're at today. You notice that the larger words are words that more people submitted on the word cloud, where the smaller the words are, less people submitted on the word cloud. So right now I can tell that we have people in the room that are anxious. Perhaps you're not knowing if you're actually going to learn something or if this is worth your time. There's some people in this room that are feeling awkward. What a wonderful thought that we're not the only ones feeling that way. Whereas there's other people in this room that are feeling accepted. Perhaps the music was inviting, or maybe it is that you're here with colleagues. So the whole point of this exercise was to determine, how does what I feel affect my outcome? And really what's important to understand as instructional coaches is that our emotional state as learners will either hinder or encourage learning. So it's really important that you begin to get a good gauge on the emotional state of the people that you're working with, whether it's the whole staff in a professional development such as this one, or it is a one-on-one conversation. That is an extremely important part of who we are and what we do, is understanding the emotional state of our learners. And we'll talk a little bit more about that today. In fact, we're going to talk about 3 parts of the outcome of coaching. And one of the things we're going to start with is how to build relationships with adults. The second thing we're going to talk about is not only how to build relationships, but how to build trusting relationships. And the third thing we're going to talk about is how to give feedback in these trusting relationships. So let's get started. Let's jump right in. The first part we're going to talk about today is the importance of building relationships with adult students. We're going to go ahead and watch a quick little video from Teach America.
The one lesson I took from my core experience was the importance of building relationships with our students. Relationships that are meaningful, personal, that really allow the child to flourish and to become themselves. It's something that I continue to use in my KIPP experience today. I stay proximate to kids. I like to hear their voices, their opinions, hear what's going well, what's not, and what their aspirations are so we can build a program around them. If I go back to my Teach for America experience, there's one student who really highlighted for me the importance of building relationships. His name's Jose. He had never gotten above a C on anything. And what I realized is that by building a strong relationship with him, he gained the confidence and the courage to try things differently, to take risks, to really dive into literacy and share with me that he couldn't read. And so we were able to teach him to read together, he and I both working on it together. And for the first time ever, he got an A on an assignment. And I think it really changed his confidence and his desire to perform and to have a different outcome in his life.
So now what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to watch this video a second time. I always like to show videos twice. The first time just to get a feel. Now what I would like you to do is re-watch the video, and this time think about how relationships affected the student, the teacher to student relationship. How did that affect the outcome of what the student was wanting to do? Now that we've watched the video twice, let's talk a little bit about what students need. This particular teacher in this video said relationships that are meaningful and personable, personal and really allow the child to flourish and to become themselves. Notice the words, relationships that are meaningful and personal. There always has to be an understanding that the relationship is important, and it has to be something that is built upon communicating with one another. And when you have those meaningful and personal relationships with others, not only do they begin to flourish, but they begin to become themselves. And for us as coaches, it is important that teachers find themselves in the classroom. The best kind of teacher there is that teacher that finds their own teacher voice. And by building strong relationships with him, the teacher said this student gained the confidence and courage to try things differently and to take risks. Notice she's talking about building relationships. Building takes time. It's not something that's done in one sitting, in 1 week, even 1 month. It takes time and it takes consistency. And when you have the consistent caring time, then you begin to build confidence and courage in other people that they're willing to try things and to take risks. It really comes down to having high expectations for the learner and communicating those high expectations so that the learner themselves begins to believe them. So with that being said, I want you guys to take a minute to think about this. What does it mean to build a relationship with another human being? What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pause. We're going to put on a timer. And after 2 minutes, we're going to share out with one another, with your partner or with your table, depending on what you feel comfortable with. Great. We heard some wonderful share outs. So what we're going to do now is we're going to think about next, well, why is relationship building important in a coaching situation? So this time what I would like you to do is you're going to have 1 minute think time, and then you're going to get up and find somebody else at another table to share your thoughts with. Why is relationship building important in a coaching situation? I love that people were able to share out, share thoughts and ideas, and I can tell by the just the feeling in the room that people really have a good sense that coaching is not about a job, it's about relationships, about helping people grow. So why is it important to build relationships with teachers you are coaching? What I'd like you to do is go to this article here where there's a link, Tools for Learning Skills. It's talking about teacher coaching relationships. So go ahead and read that, and then we'll talk a little bit about why it's important to build these relationships. Great. Now that everybody had time to talk about this, we're going to look at this article. And let me just scroll up so that we can all see it. The first piece of the article was so important to what we're talking about today. Notice it says, in any professional learning program, teachers and coaches must have a good relationship in order to get the work done. So why are relationships important? Because ultimately we want to have productivity. We want to get the work done. But notice it also says to have a productive relationship, teachers and coaches need to trust one another, respect each other professionally, and commit to keeping their partnership agreements and clearly define the work they will do together. So what's important is that these relationships must be built upon trust, upon respect, and upon commitment. Not only commitment, but things need to be clearly defined so that teachers know where they're going. Studies have found that any student, when they know the outcome that they're shooting before they even get to it, it actually causes you to be more successful because you already know by which point you have to get to. So with that in mind, lastly, in this particular section, I want you to chew on this particular thought and write it down in the journal provided for you. Why are relationships important to the work of an instructional coach? Now that we've had time to think about the building of a relationship, let's talk about how to build trusting relationships. So not just relationships, but trusting relationships. We're going to talk today about how the brain responds to learning situations. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. And so what we're going to do is we're going to be reading this article called Conscious Discipline Brain State Model. And so I want you guys to take a few minutes to read that, and then we'll come back to this question. Great. Now that we're back, let's talk a little bit about how the brain responds to learning situations. There's basically three parts of our brain that respond to learning. There is one part here at the stem, the survival state, when people are just wondering, am I safe enough even to take the risk? Then you have this middle section is called the emotional state in the limbic system that are wondering, am I even valued? Is the work that we're doing here going to be valued? And lastly, here in the executive state is where true learning takes place. This is where people begin to problem solve. And so we want to talk about first how how we can build trusting relationships when perhaps somebody is in the survival state. And this survival state is, like we mentioned earlier, a place where people are just wondering, are we safe? And so one of the biggest pieces of our job in this state is to make sure that people understand, as instructional coaches, we're not here to cooperate against you with the administration. In fact, what we do together in this state, in our job, what we do together, the planning and the modeling and the reflecting, has nothing to do with the administration. It has nothing to do with being evaluated. It has everything to do with growth and the process involved in growing. And what you can do in this state to relieve the tension and the fear is to prove what you're saying by what you're doing. So there's one way that you can build relationships when somebody's in a survival state. Let's talk about the emotional state where people are afraid. This is that limbic part of your brain where you're wondering, am I valued? Am I loved? And really, for a teacher working with an instructional coach, what you want to do is make sure that you reassure them that their goal as a professional is just as important to you as it is to them, and that's to grow. So emphasize the goal, the growing and the learning through their own experiences as self-directed learners. Prove to them through your actions that what they do in the classroom and how they grow as professionals is important to you. And lastly, the executive state of the brain, building trust. That's where the largest amount of learning takes place. This is where you want to set measurable goals, use the experiences of the teacher to become self-directed, and make sure that these goals are clear and focused goals. Lastly, what I'd like you to do is I want you to chew on this for a little bit and enter into your journal. How can you assess what part of the brain a teacher is working from? Again, when you are coaching somebody, we've talked about the survival state, the emotional state, and the executive state. Now the question is, how can you assess what part of the brain a teacher is working from? So now that we've learned the importance of building relationships with our adult learners, and the importance of building trusting relationships with our adult learners, now we're going to talk about in part 3 strategies for communicating effective descriptive feedback for adult students. Feedback is an important part of learning because what you need to understand is that feedback is the highway used to grow to the next level. And so one of the ways that we can talk about feedback is, according to Wiggins, effective feedback is concrete, specific, and useful. it provides actionable information. So what I want to encourage you to do as professionals, as instructional coaches, is when you go and observe somebody or you look over their lessons, what I want you to do is go far beyond just looking at classroom management. I want you to understand that as an instructional coach, classroom management is number one on our list for teachers, because if you can't manage your class, you can't teach. But once you're able to get past that point, really the largest portion of learning comes when you begin to talk about the curriculum, when you begin to talk about the instruction. And this feedback, once you're able to get past management, this feedback has to be actionable information. That means that this information that you give them should be able to be applied right away. It should change something. It should cause reflection. It should be able to be a plan that could be implemented, even if you have to plan for it first. So this actionable feedback means it's not just, hey, you did a good job, or hey, you need to work on this, but this is how we're going to do this. Here's our plan. Secondly, another way that you can talk about feedback, according to Wiggins, he says to be useful, feedback must be consistent. Clearly, performers can only adjust their performance successfully if the information fed back to them is stable, accurate, and trustworthy. Now, when you think about the soccer field and you're a coach and you're giving feedback, you can't just say, hey, you shot that ball wrong. What you want to do is you want to be able to give some steps. Hey, use this part of your foot. I want you to, your body should look like this by the time you're done kicking that ball, shooting that ball. If you want to angle that ball, you need to do this. The feedback needs to be consistent. That means every time you see an issue, not only are you giving the feedback, but you're allowing the thinking to take place so that it can be reflected upon and then fixed, or at least worked on. And so again, effective feedback has to be consistent, as well as it needs to be actionable. It has to be something that you can work on right away. It has to be consistent, because the learner should be able to consistently learn from what you're sharing with them. Now, those are only two pieces of information for feedback. There are a plethora of feedback articles and websites that you can look at, books as a coach on to how to give feedback and how to give effective feedback. So for this last part of this section, what I want you to chew on in your journal is what forms of feedback can be useful to a teacher. Would it be something online? Is it verbal? Think about all the ways that you give feedback and how that looks. And then after we're done chewing on it, we're actually going to share out some thoughts and ideas. Well, we really appreciate you being with us today. Today we talked about relationships and the importance of building those relationships. We talked about how trust is the key to learning, that people feel comfortable. And we also talked about feedback, how you give effective feedback. So building relationships that are trustworthy relationships, and giving effective feedback are three of the main components of our jobs as instructional coaches. If you would like any more information about what was referenced today, what we went ahead and did was add some references at the end. We would encourage you to check these links and to read more about building relationships, building those that are trustworthy, and then giving feedback that is effective.